first of many. Trains that not only brought in supplies, but that could take out the wounded, the sick women, the half-frozen children. All those that needed better care. All winter long, the lake traffic continued. And all through that terrible winter, the men of the Red Army, outside the city, found the strength not only to defend, but to attack. Time after time, they hurled themselves against the invader, driving him inch by inch back from the city's outskirts. And then spring came. Spring. Outside Leningrad, the snows begin to thaw, and German bodies are washed from their icebox graves, mute evidence of Russian tenacity. The warm breath of spring is felt, too, on the frozen surface of Lake Ladoga, but the trucks continue to roll, even though the ice is melting beneath them. Spring, as it invariably does, comes to the city, too. But spring is more than a new season to the people of Leningrad. It's a new life. The city begins to breathe again. For the first time in months, the trolleys ran. That first day, it seemed that every man and woman and child in the city had to go for a ride. This was life again. Life for the Leningrad children that weren't killed by Nazi bombs or by the horrible winter. Life for the Russian WACs, the women of the Red Army. And for the Russian waves, the women of the Red Fleet. And for the sailors of the fleet themselves, the artists of the famous ballet theater have come to offer entertainment. Spring is here. Summer is coming. And Leningrad is still free. Although some Germans did finally succeed in getting into the city. But under different circumstances than they had anticipated. Yes, here too the legend of Nazi invincibility was shattered. Against the iron will and courage of a determined people. The citizens of Leningrad have proved that generals may win campaigns, but people win wars. By summer of 1942, new posters were appearing in the streets of Moscow. Posters that greeted and welcomed their allies. Allies whose help was already arriving in Russian ports. Allies whose friendliness had sent drugs and food and warm clothing to help sustain them in their darkest hour. But in spite of all this, the staff of the Red Army knew that they still faced the most powerful enemy in history, and that enemy would attack again. But when this attack came, the whole German strength was to be concentrated on one objective: the Caucasus and oil. The Caucasus Mountains represent one of the toughest military obstacles in the world. Towering peaks rising to heights of as much as 18,000 feet, with only one practical highway traversing them. And Baku, the biggest oil field, is on the other side. To reach Baku, the only feasible military route was along the coast to the Caspian Sea. But the map shows what a dangerously extended supply line this would entail. To make the operation a success for the Germans, The first necessity was control of the northern hub of the rail lines of the area and a new base of operations. That hub was a Volga River port we have come to know well, Stalingrad, named for Russia's present leader. The pride of this generation of Russians, for it was their city, built in their time. With the capture of Stalingrad, the Nazis would have a base from which to launch a flanking attack on Moscow. With one master stroke, the Russian armies to the south would be cut off from help. And in the north, Russian factories, Russian farms, and Russian armies would be practically cut off from Caucasus oil, and also from American and British supplies, which were shipped to Russia through Iran and Iraq. German control of the entrance to the Volga and its two main ports, Astrakhan and Stalingrad, would be a crippling blow for Russia. For the Volga is the vital artery through which flowed the lifeblood of supplies. Early in May, the German offensive began along a front extending from Kursk to the Crimea. Within 2 weeks, the Nazi steamroller had overrun the Kerch Peninsula, although 2 months more were to elapse before embattled Sevastopol finally fell, giving the Nazis complete control of the Crimea and the southern route to the Caucasian oil fields. Next, they started to drive further north and drove through to the Don River in the area of Voronezh, then spread south and east until they occupied the whole area from the Don River south Rostov. This left them in perfect position to strike against Stalingrad. Further and further south, the drive plunged on, and by the end of August, they had captured the oil fields at Maykoff, needless to say, first demolished by the Russians, and reached the northern Caucasus. Yes, the Germans were only a few miles from their goal, the oil fields at Baku, but two barriers still stood between them: Russian mountains and Russian determination. The people of the Caucasus joined with the army to form an unshatterable wall against the full onslaught of the attack. Further north, the Nazi pincers were within 15 miles of Stalingrad. This city had become the focal point of the whole campaign. Regardless of the cost, Stalingrad must be captured. Those were the German orders. German guns, German bombs shattered the city into pieces. By September 20th, the Germans, after 30 days of grueling and ceaseless fighting, battled their way into the city's outskirts. By the end of the month, their drive had carried them through the whole northwest section of the city and into occupation of part of the center, including the railroad station. On the last day of September, Hitler announced that the fall of the city was only a matter of a few days. Once more, the world was afraid a Russian campaign was lost. But once more, the Germans were to stand on the very threshold of victory and still fail. For now they were to meet a fire of fury such as they had never known. Gone before, the battles waged in the streets of Kiev, Rostov, Odessa, Sevastopol. These were all preludes to what happened in Stalingrad. Every inch of the city was a strategic point to be defended as such. By the end of October, snow covered Stalingrad. From the air, the Germans tried to surrender to the Russian-held part of the city. At the same time, the battle of the streets continued. November dawned, the Russians were no longer defending their city inch by inch. Inch by inch, they were regaining it. Now, as the whole world spoke in admiration of the city of steel, the ticker tape brought us breathtaking news. American and British troops had landed in and occupied North Africa. Further east, the British Eighth Army was driving westward, pursuing the vaunted Africa Corps. And in the northeast, the Red Army had launched its smashing counteroffensive. The Germans were learning the real meaning of the words combined operations. As though a spring had been released, the Russians attacked along the entire front. In the far north, the Germans felt the first impact as the Russians recaptured Schlüsselburg, breaking the Axis ring around Leningrad. Soon after, another offensive lashed out further south, bypassing the Germans' defensive position of Rzhev and plunging down to Veliki Luki. Still another Russian blow fell in the Voronezh area, pushing a threatening spearhead deep into the German lines. In the far south, the Germans were moving away from Grozny instead of toward it, under the force of the Russian attack. At Stalingrad, the Germans were about to meet new opponents. Fresh reserves were arriving from far Siberia. They had been stationed there in case of trouble with the Japanese. Now these troops had been transported to relieve the embattled defenders of Stalingrad. And as the reserves entered the city, at headquarters, the commanders of 3 Russian armies were meeting. The Germans had fought for Stalingrad as a prize. The Russians were determined to make it a trap. 2 simultaneous attacks were launched, one from the north, one from the south. The German armies encircling Stalingrad were now themselves threatened with encirclement. Finally, the 2 prongs met. These battle-hardened soldiers of the Northern Army and soldiers of the Southern were emotional as children as they greeted each other. They knew this meeting meant the salvation of Stalingrad and of their country. And on this Christmas of 1942, the people of the Soviet Union can celebrate with happy hearts. They have received a most precious gift from the men of their army, the assurance of ultimate victory. Just as in our hometowns, it is the Children's Day in Moscow. It is a happier Christmas this year. Today, there are no German bombers over